I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who'd end up staring at her husband across the dinner table on their 35th wedding anniversary, watching him fidget with his wedding ring like it was suddenly too tight. The table was set with our good china, the delicate blue and white pattern we'd received as a wedding gift from Dean's mother all those years ago. I'd even lit the candles, their warm glow casting dancing shadows across the dining room walls of our coastal Oregon home. The salmon was perfectly cooked, the wine properly chilled, and the house felt peaceful in that settled way that comes after decades of shared routines. At 62, I thought I'd finally earned this quiet evenings with my husband, grandchildren visiting on weekends, maybe travel to places we'd always talked about but never had time to see. Dean, at 59, was nearing retirement from his architectural firm, and I'd been looking forward to having him home more, to rediscovering each other after the busy years of raising Caroline, Eli, and Sophie. Margot, Dean said, his voice unusually formal. He'd barely touched his dinner, I noticed, though he'd complimented it when I'd first served it. We need to talk. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Something in his tone made my fork pause halfway to my mouth. In 35 years of marriage, I'd learned to read the subtle shifts in his voice, the way his jaw tensed when he was preparing for something difficult. But this felt different, heavier somehow. What about? I asked, setting my fork down carefully. The candle flames flickered, and for a moment, the only sound was the distant crash of waves against the rocky shoreline beyond our property. Dean took a long sip of wine, then another. His salt and pepper hair was neatly combed, his blue button-down shirt crisp as always. Even in retirement planning, Dean maintained the careful grooming that had served him well in his professional life. He was still handsome, I thought, still the man whose confident smile had caught my attention at that faculty mixer when I was teaching high school English, and he was a young architect fresh out of graduate school. I've been doing a lot of thinking lately, he began, his eyes focused somewhere over my left shoulder rather than meeting mine. About us, about where we are in our lives. The words landed strangely. It's our anniversary, Dean. I thought we were celebrating where we are. He shifted in his chair, the sound of wood against hardwood unnaturally loud in the quiet room. That's just it, Margot. I don't think I can celebrate anymore. I don't think this is working. This? I repeated, genuinely confused. What do you mean, this? Us? The word dropped between us like a stone. Our marriage. This life we've built. I think. He paused, running his hand through his hair in that familiar gesture that usually meant he was wrestling with a design problem at work. I think we need to end it. The words didn't make sense at first. They sat in the air between us like a foreign language I couldn't quite translate. End it. Our marriage. On our anniversary. I don't understand, I said slowly. Are you saying you want a divorce? Yes. The simplicity of his response was somehow more shocking than if he'd shouted it. I want a divorce, Margot. I need a divorce. I stared at him, this stranger wearing my husband's face. The candles continued their quiet flickering, the salmon grew cold on both our plates, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear the neighbor's dog barking. Normal sounds from a world that had suddenly tilted off its axis. Why, the question came out as barely a whisper. Dean finally looked at me then, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before, not anger, not sadness, but something that looked almost like pity. Because I'm not happy, Margot. I haven't been happy for a long time. We've been living like roommates, going through the motions. I wake up every day feeling like I'm suffocating. But I struggled to form words. We were planning your retirement, the trips we talked about, the grandchildren. That's not the life I want anymore. His voice was gaining strength, as if saying the words out loud was liberating him. I look at the next 20 or 30 years, and I see the same routine, the same conversations, the same predictable existence stretching out forever. I can't do it, Margot. I won't do it. The room felt like it was spinning slowly around me. I reached for my wine glass, needing something to anchor me, but my hand was shaking too much to lift it steadily. Is there someone else? I asked, though part of me already knew the answer from the guilt that flashed across his face. He was quiet for a long moment. Yes. The confirmation hit me like a physical blow. I felt my chest tighten, my breath becoming shallow and rapid. Who? Her name is Naomi. She teaches yoga at the community center. I met her when I started taking those classes for my back pain last year. Naomi. I knew the name. Dean had mentioned her a few times, the instructor who had helped him with his posture, who had recommended stretches for his chronic lower back issues. Young, I remembered him saying, enthusiastic, full of positive energy. How long? I managed to ask. It's not what you think. How long, Dean? He looked down at his hands. 6 months, maybe 7. 7 months. While I'd been planning anniversary dinners and researching retirement communities and talking excitedly about finally having time for ourselves. 7 months while I'd been sleeping beside him, sharing meals with him, discussing our children's lives and our hopes for the future. I never meant for this to happen, he continued, his voice taking on that reasonable tone he used when explaining architectural concepts to clients. But when I'm with Naomi, I feel alive again. I feel like myself, not just your husband or the kid's father or the guy who pays the mortgage and fixes the leaky faucets. I feel like Dean. You are Dean, I said, my voice sounding strange and hollow. You've always been Dean. This Dean, sitting here in our home, in the life we built together. He shook his head. This isn't who I am, Margot. This is who I became because it was expected, because it was the responsible thing to do. But I'm 59 years old, and if I don't take this chance now, I never will. What chance? To abandon your wife and family for a woman half your age? She's 28, he said defensively. And this isn't about age. Of course it is. Something was awakening in me, a spark of anger cutting through the numbness. It's about the most predictable midlife crisis in the book. You're scared of getting old, so you found a young woman who makes you feel like time hasn't passed. That's not fair, isn't it? I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. 35 years, Dean. 3 children, a home, a life, a partnership. And you're throwing it away because a 28-year-old yoga instructor makes you feel young? You make it sound so cheap. How should I make it sound? Noble? Romantic? You're having an affair, Dean. You're destroying our family because you're afraid of growing old with the woman who's already grown old beside you. He flinched at that, and I realized I'd hit something true and painful. Good, I thought, with surprising fierceness. Let him hurt too. I don't expect you to understand, he said quietly. You're right. I don't understand how the man I've loved for 35 years can sit at our anniversary dinner and tell me he's been lying to me for 7 months. I don't understand how you can look at everything we've built and decide it's suffocating rather than comfortable. And I especially don't understand how you can think this is a conversation to have tonight of all nights. Dean's composure cracked slightly. I couldn't keep pretending anymore, Margot. Every day was becoming harder. I thought if I told you on our anniversary, it would somehow be more honest. Like marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. How literary of you. The sarcasm in my voice surprised even me. Did Naomi help you come up with that metaphor? Don't be cruel. Don't be cruel? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Dean, you just told me you've been living a lie for 7 months and want to divorce me for a woman younger than our eldest daughter. I think I'm entitled to a little cruelty. We stared at each other across the table, the space between us feeling like a canyon that had opened in the few minutes since he'd said the word divorce. The man I'd loved, supported, built a life with was still sitting there, but he was also somehow gone, replaced by this stranger who spoke of our marriage like a prison sentence he was eager to escape. What happens now? I asked finally. I move out. We figure out the legal stuff. We tell the kids. He paused. We try to be civilized about this. Civilized. I repeated the word like I was tasting something bitter. And where will you go? To her? I've rented a place downtown for now, just until we can work out the details. Even this he'd planned in advance. While I'd been choosing wines for our anniversary dinner, he'd been arranging his exit strategy. The children, I said suddenly, the full weight of what this meant beginning to settle on me. Caroline, Eli, Sophie. How do we tell them their father is leaving their mother for someone barely older than they are? We tell them we grew apart, that sometimes marriages end, and it's no one's fault. Except that's not true, is it? This is absolutely someone's fault. This is your fault, Dean. He stood up then, his napkin falling to the floor. I'm going to pack some things. I'll stay in the guest room tonight and leave in the morning. We can talk about the details later, when we've both had time to process this. process this? I felt that hollow laugh threatening to escape again. Like it's a business transaction? Like you haven't had 7 months to process while I've had 7 minutes. But he was already leaving the dining room, his footsteps heavy. On the stairs leading to our bedroom, his former bedroom, I realized. I sat alone at the table, surrounded by the ruins of what was supposed to be a celebration, listening to the sounds of drawers opening and closing above me. The candles burned lower, wax pooling at their bases. The salmon had gone completely cold. Outside, the waves continued their eternal rhythm against the shore, indifferent to the small human drama playing out in the house on the cliff. I reached for my phone, then put it down, picked it up again. Caroline would be at home with her family. In Portland, Eli was 3 hours ahead in Denver, probably putting his kids to bed. Sophie was in Seattle, working late at her art studio as usual. How do you call your children and tell them their father has decided to blow up their family? How do you explain that the man who taught them about commitment and responsibility has just demonstrated the opposite of both? Instead, I sat in the growing darkness, listening to my husband pack for a life that didn't include me, and tried to understand how 35 years could end over salmon and wine on what should have been our celebration. The next morning brought the kind of crisp Oregon autumn day that usually made me grateful to live where we did. Clear skies, the ocean sparkling in the distance, the maple tree in our front yard showing the first hints of gold. But as I sat at the kitchen table with my untouched coffee, watching Dean load suitcases into his BMW, everything felt wrong. The familiar routine of morning coffee, the newspaper spread before me, the comfortable silence that had defined thousands of similar mornings, all of it felt like a performance now. A memory of normalcy that no longer applied to my life. Dean had been efficient and quiet, speaking only when necessary. I'll call you in a few days, he'd said. We need to discuss lawyers, finances, all of that. He'd paused at the door, his hand on the knob, as if waiting for something. Forgiveness, maybe, or at least acknowledgement that this was for the best. When I said nothing, he'd left. Now I sat alone in our house, my house. I corrected myself, trying to figure out what came next. The phone rang at 9:30. Caroline's name appeared on the screen, and I realized I'd been dreading and needing this call in equal measure. Mom? Her voice was tense. Dad called me this morning, he said. He said you two are getting divorced. Please tell me this is some kind of misunderstanding. It's not a misunderstanding. The words felt strange in my mouth, like a language I was still learning to speak. But why? What happened? You and Dad have been together forever. You're the most solid couple I know. I closed my eyes, picturing my eldest daughter in her kitchen in Portland, probably making breakfast for her own children while processing this news. Caroline had always been the responsible one, the one who called every Sunday and remembered every anniversary. At 33, she was a successful family law attorney who'd built her career on helping people navigate the wreckage of failed marriages. The irony wasn't lost on me. Your father met someone else, I said simply. The silence that followed was so complete I wondered if the call had dropped. Someone else, Caroline repeated finally, her voice flat. As in an affair? Yes, Jesus Christ. I could hear her moving around, probably pacing the way she did when she was agitated. How long has this been going on? 7 months, apparently. Her name is Naomi. She teaches yoga. Another long pause. Mom, I need you to listen to me very carefully. As your daughter, I'm furious and heartbroken for you. As a lawyer, I'm telling you we need to be strategic here. Don't sign anything, don't agree to anything, and don't make any major decisions until we can figure out exactly what's going on. What do you mean? I mean, divorce is rarely as simple as people want to believe, especially after 35 years of marriage. There are assets to protect, retirement accounts to consider, property to divide. And if Dad's been planning this for 7 months, she trailed off. Mom, has he been acting strangely about money lately? Any unusual spending, secretive phone calls about finances, anything like that? I thought about it. He has been more private about his laptop lately, and he's been handling all the retirement planning discussions himself, which was unusual. He used to want to go over everything together. That's exactly what I was afraid of. Caroline's voice had shifted into her professional mode. Mom, I'm driving down this afternoon. Don't touch any financial documents, don't call any banks, and definitely don't let Dad back in the house to get anything else without me there. Caroline, You don't need to. Yes, I do. This is what I do for a living, Mom. I've seen this before. Men don't usually wake up one morning and decide to leave their wives. They plan, they prepare, they move money around. After we hung up, I found myself wandering through the house, seeing it with new eyes. How many conversations had Dean and I had in this kitchen about retirement, about our plans, about the future we thought we were building together. I remembered him showing me brochures for cruise lines, his enthusiasm for a trip to Europe we'd been planning. Had any of it been real, or had he already been imagining a different future with someone else? The guest room upstairs still smelled faintly of his cologne. He'd been thorough but not ruthless, taking his clothes and personal items but leaving behind the photos, the shared books, the accumulated detritus of a long marriage. It felt almost worse than if he'd stripped the room bare. This way, it looked like he was just traveling, like he'd be back next week with dirty laundry and stories to tell. Caroline arrived at PM with her laptop bag and a grim expression. She hugged me tightly at the door, and I realized it was the first real human contact I'd had since Dean's announcement. I hadn't cried yet, the shock was still to complete for tears, but something about my daughter's fierce embrace made my throat tight. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "I honestly don't know. This doesn't feel real yet. It's going to feel very real once we start looking at the finances." She set up her laptop at the dining room table, the same table where Dean had dismantled our marriage less than 24 hours earlier. "I need you to gather all the financial documents you can find: bank statements, investment accounts, retirement funds, insurance policies, everything." We spent the next 2 hours creating a comprehensive picture of our financial life. It was more complicated than I'd realized, accumulated over decades of steady earning and careful saving. The house was worth considerably more than we'd paid for it 30 years ago. Dean's retirement accounts were substantial. We had investments, savings, the cabin at the lake that my father had left me. But as Caroline dug deeper, her expression grew increasingly troubled. "Mom," she said finally, looking up from her laptop screen, "when was the last time you saw statements for Dad's individual retirement account?" "I don't know. He always handled those." "Why?" "Because according to this, it was liquidated for months ago. All of it." The words didn't compute at first. Liquidated? What does that mean? "It means he cashed it out. $350,000, minus the early withdrawal penalties. It's gone." I stared at her. "That's not possible." "He would have told me. We would have discussed something that major." Caroline's jaw was tight. "Mom, there's more. The stock portfolio? Also liquidated 3 months ago. And look at this." She turned the laptop screen toward me. "There's been a pattern of large cash withdrawals from your joint checking account over the past 6 months. Small enough not to trigger any automatic notifications, but they add up to almost $40,000. The room felt like it was tilting. "Where did the money go?" "That's what we need to find out." Caroline was already typing, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "But Mom, this wasn't a sudden decision. This was planned, methodical. Dad's been preparing for this divorce for months, maybe longer." As if on cue, my phone rang. Dean's name appeared on the screen. "Don't answer it," Caroline said immediately. "I have to. He's still my husband. He's your soon-to-be ex-husband who just stole hundreds of thousands of dollars from your joint assets." Let it go to voicemail. But I was already answering. "Hello, Dean." "Margot, hi. I was wondering if we could meet tomorrow to discuss some of the practical matters. I know a good mediator who could help us work through the financial details without making things too adversarial." Caroline was shaking her head vigorously, making slashing motions across her throat. "Actually, Dean, I have some questions about our finances. Caroline is here helping me understand our situation, and we've discovered some concerning discrepancies." The pause was too long. "What kind of discrepancies?" "The kind where retirement accounts get liquidated without your wife's knowledge. The kind where hundreds of thousands of dollars disappear from investment portfolios." Another pause. "Margot, I can explain all of that. It's not what you think. What I think is that you've been planning this divorce for months and moving our shared assets around to benefit yourself. What I think is that your yoga instructor girlfriend has been a much longer-term relationship than you admitted. You're getting worked up over nothing. Those were legitimate financial moves, legitimate moves that you made without discussing them with your wife of 35 years. I was protecting our assets, you were protecting your assets, Dean. There's a difference." Caroline was nodding approvingly, making notes on her legal pad. "Look," Dean said, his voice taking on that condescending tone that meant he thought I was being irrational. "Why don't we all sit down together, you, me, Caroline, and my attorney? We can clear all of this up." "Your attorney?" The phrase hit me like cold water. "You already have an attorney?" Yes. I thought it would be best to get professional guidance. "How long have you had an attorney, Dean?" Silence. "How long?" "A few months," he said finally. I looked at Caroline, who was writing furiously. A few months. While he'd been liquidating accounts and making plans, he'd also been getting legal advice. This wasn't a man who'd suddenly fallen in love and made an impulsive decision to leave his wife. This was a man who'd been systematically planning his exit while lying to me every single day. "I see," I said quietly. "Well, then I suppose I should get an attorney too. Margot, please. We don't need to make this ugly. We can work this out reasonably, like adults." Adults discuss major financial decisions with their spouses. Adults don't liquidate retirement accounts in secret. Adults don't move money around behind their partner's back while planning to abandon them. That's not what happened. That's exactly what happened, Dean. And now I understand why you chose last night to tell me. You needed me out of the picture before I could figure out what you'd been doing. I hung up before he could respond. Caroline looked up from her notes. "Mom, I'm proud of you." That was perfect. "I don't feel proud. I feel sick." "You should feel sick." "What Dad did. This isn't just adultery, Mom. This is financial abuse. He's been systematically stripping assets from your marriage while lying to your face." I sank into a chair, the full weight of the betrayal settling on me. It wasn't just that Dean had fallen out of love with me, or even that he'd found someone else. He'd been actively working against me, undermining our shared future while pretending to plan it with me. "Where do you think the money went?" I asked. Caroline was already back at her laptop. "I have some ideas. Give me a few hours to do some research." "But Mom, whatever Dad bought with that money, we're going to find it. And we're going to make sure you get your fair share of everything." As evening fell, I made dinner for Caroline and myself, the first meal I'd cooked since that disastrous anniversary dinner. It felt strange to set the table for 2 instead of 3, but also somehow right. My daughter and I talked about practical things: lawyers, timelines, what to tell Eli and Sophie. But underneath the logistics, I felt something shifting inside me. The numbness was beginning to fade, replaced by something sharper and more focused. Dean had counted on my shock, my heartbreak, my willingness to be reasonable and accommodating. He'd expected me to be the same supportive, understanding wife I'd always been, even in divorce. But as I watched Caroline work through the night, building a case against her own father to protect her mother, I realized Dean had made a crucial miscalculation. He'd underestimated both of us: the daughter he'd raised to be strong and the wife he'd taken for granted for 35 years. "Mom," Caroline said around midnight, looking up from her laptop with tired but determined eyes, "I found something. Dad used some of that liquidated money to buy property, a cabin in Colorado. Colorado, registered under a trust name, but I was able to trace it back to him. Purchased 5 months ago. Cash deal." She turned the screen toward me. "It's beautiful, actually. Remote, expensive, perfect for a romantic getaway." I stared at the listing photos: a rustic but luxurious cabin nestled in the mountains, with soaring windows and a deck overlooking a pristine lake. The kind of place Dean and I had talked about renting for a vacation someday, when we had more time and fewer obligations. Except he'd bought it without me. For someone else. With our money. "He's been planning to leave me for months," I said quietly. "Maybe longer." This wasn't about suddenly falling in love with Naomi. This was about wanting a different life and systematically working toward it. "I'm afraid so." Caroline's voice was gentle. "But Mom, this also gives us leverage. He can't claim this was an amicable split or that he's being generous. He's been committing financial fraud." I nodded, still staring at the photos of the cabin that was supposed to be Dean's new beginning. Somewhere in Colorado, in a house built with money that belonged to both of us, my husband was planning to play house with a woman half my age. But Dean had made one critical error in his planning. He'd underestimated me. He'd assumed that after 35 years of putting his career first, supporting his ambitions, and managing our family life, I would simply accept whatever scraps he offered in divorce. He was wrong. The moving truck arrived on a gray Tuesday morning, 2 weeks after Dean's anniversary confession, I watched from the kitchen window as two men began loading furniture and boxes under Dean's supervision. Our dining room set, the one we'd saved for months to buy when Caroline was a baby, his home office furniture, the leather chairs from the living room, books, artwork, the antique clock his parents had given us for our 10th anniversary. Piece by piece, Dean was dismantling the physical evidence of our shared life. I'd been expecting this, of course. We'd had several tense phone conversations through our respective lawyers about what he would take and when. Caroline had insisted on being present, but I'd asked her to stay home. Some humiliations needed to be faced alone. Dean knocked on the front door before entering, a courtesy that felt more cruel than consideration. This was still legally his home, but he was treating me like a stranger who might not welcome his presence. Margot. He nodded politely, as if we were acquaintances rather than people who'd shared a bed for 35 years. Dean? I kept my voice neutral. He looked different, younger somehow, despite the stress lines around his eyes. New jeans instead of his usual khakis, a flannel shirt I didn't recognize, hiking boots that had never seen our closet. Even his posture seemed different, less formal. The costume of a man trying to become someone else. This shouldn't take too long, he said. I've tried to be fair about what I'm taking. Fair. The word almost made me laugh. Fair would have been discussing our financial situation before you liquidated our retirement accounts. His jaw tightened. We've been over this, Margot. My attorney explained that I had every right to manage those accounts. Your attorney. My attorney has a different perspective on that. I don't want to fight with you. No, you just want to rob me and leave. Fighting would require you to stick around long enough to defend yourself. Dean glanced toward the front door, where the moving men were maneuvering our coffee table through the entrance. Can we not do this now? In front of them? Do what? Have a conversation about your behavior? I suppose that would be uncomfortable. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. You're angry. I understand that, but taking it out on me isn't going to change anything. Taking it out on you? The phrase hung in the air between us. Dean, you stole from me. You lied to me for months. You abandoned our marriage for a woman young enough to be our daughter. And you think I'm taking it out on you by mentioning these facts? I didn't steal anything. Those were joint assets that you liquidated without consultation or consent. That's called theft in most legal systems. One of the moving men appeared in the doorway. Excuse me, sir. We're not sure about the piano. Should we take it? The piano. Sophie's piano. The one Dean and I had bought for her when she was 8 and showing such promise. She'd played it through high school, even into college when she'd come home for visits. It hadn't been touched much in recent years, but it was still beautiful, still part of the family's story. No, I said before Dean could answer. The piano stays. Margot. Sophie doesn't even play anymore. The piano stays. Dean, it's not going to your love nest in Colorado. His face flushed. How did you? He stopped himself, glancing at the moving man who was trying to pretend he wasn't listening to our domestic drama. How did I find out about the cabin? The same way I found out about the liquidated accounts and the secret withdrawals and the attorney you hired months ago. I may have been naive, but I'm not stupid. Leave the piano, Dean told the mover, who nodded and retreated quickly. When we were alone again, Dean turned back to me with an expression I'd never seen before, not anger, not guilt, but something closer to fear. Margot, I need you to understand something. I never meant to hurt you. This isn't about you being inadequate or not enough or any of those things. This is about me needing to live differently. And you couldn't live differently with me? Not the way I need to. With Naomi, I feel free, unchained from all the expectations and responsibilities and routines that have defined my life for so long. Those expectations and responsibilities have names, Dean. They're called marriage and family and commitment. They're called being an adult. That's exactly what I mean. His voice was rising, despite his earlier concerns about the movers overhearing. Everything with you is about duty and obligation. With Naomi, it's about possibility. Possibility. I repeated the word like I was tasting something bitter. Is that what we're calling midlife crisis now? This isn't a midlife crisis. This is a life awakening. How original. Did you come up with that yourself? Or did Naomi help? Dean's face darkened. Don't talk about her like that. Like what? Like she's a homewrecker? Like she's a child playing house with someone else's husband? She's not a child. She's a grown woman who sees potential in me that you've forgotten exists. What potential, Dean? The potential to abandon your responsibilities when they become inconvenient? The potential to lie and cheat and steal when it serves your purposes? The potential to be happy. The words exploded out of him. To wake up, excited about the day instead of dreading the same routine, the same conversations, the same predictable existence stretching out until I die. The movers had gone suspiciously quiet in the other room, and I realized our voices had been carrying more than we'd intended. Lower your voice, I said quietly. You wanted discretion. Dean took a deep breath, visibly trying to compose himself. You're right, I'm sorry. This is hard for both of us. No, Dean. This is hard for me. This is liberating for you. Don't confuse the two. He was quiet for a moment, watching through the window as the movers loaded another box into their truck. I know you hate me right now. I don't hate you. The words surprised me as much as they seemed to surprise him. Hating you would require caring more about you than I care about myself, and I'm done doing that. Something shifted in his expression. A flicker of something that might have been lost. Margot, the children know, by the way. About Naomi, about the cabin, about the money. Caroline figured most of it out, and Eli and Sophie weren't hard to convince once they had the facts. What did you tell them? I told them the truth. That their father decided his own happiness was more important than his family's security or well-being. That's not fair. You're turning them against me. I'm not turning them against anyone, Dean. I'm just not protecting you from the consequences of your choices anymore. That's what wives do. We smooth things over, make excuses, help our husbands appear better than they actually are. I've been doing it for 35 years, but I'm retired from that job now, so they won't speak to me? Caroline won't. Not right now. Eli is processing. Sophie is heartbroken, but still hopes you'll come to your senses. I paused, though I told her not to. Hold her breath. Dean ran his hand through his hair, that familiar gesture that once indicated he was working through a design problem, but now seemed more like a man trying to hold himself together. I never wanted it to be like this, he said quietly. How did you want it to be, Dean? You liquidated our joint assets without telling me, bought property for your girlfriend with money that belonged to both of us, and planned your exit for months while lying to my face every single day. Exactly how did you think this was going to go? I thought you'd understand eventually. That you'd want me to be happy. I do want you to be happy. I wanted us to be happy together. But since you decided unilaterally that was impossible, I now want me to be happy. And that means making sure you don't get to steal our shared future to fund your fantasy. One of the movers appeared again, clipboard in hand. Sir, we're about done. Just need you to sign off on the inventory. Dean nodded, then looked back at me. Will you be okay? Here in the house by yourself? The question might have been touching, if it weren't coming from the man who'd systematically undermined my financial security while planning to abandon me. I'll be fine, Dean. Better than fine. I'll be free of the expectations and responsibilities of being married to someone who sees those things as burdens rather than blessings. He winced at that. Margot, goodbye, Dean. I hope your new life is everything you've imagined it will be. I went upstairs while he finished with the movers, not trusting myself to watch him leave. From the bedroom window, my bedroom window now, I could see him directing the final loading, moving with the efficient energy of a man eager to begin his new life. 20 minutes later, I heard the front door close for the final time. The moving truck rumbled to life, and I watched from behind the curtain as Dean climbed into his BMW and followed it down our tree-lined street. 35 years reduced to a convoy of vehicles carrying furniture and boxes toward whatever future he'd bought with our money. The silence that followed was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Not the comfortable quiet of a weekday morning, when Dean was at work, or the peaceful hush of an evening when we were both reading. This was the silence of absence, of spaces that would never be filled again in quite the same way. I walked through the house, cataloging what remained. The piano, thank God. My books, though the shelves looked sparse without his architecture volumes and technical manuals. The kitchen was largely intact. Dean had never been much of a cook. The living room felt cavernous without his leather chairs, but also somehow lighter. In the bedroom, his closet stood empty except for a few wire hangers swaying slightly in the central air current. The bathroom counter showed pale rectangles, where his cologne bottles had sat. Even his side of the medicine cabinet was bare. It was then, standing in our bathroom, looking at the ghost outlines of his possessions, that I finally cried. Not the dramatic, cathartic tears I might have expected, but a quiet, steady weeping for all the years that had led to this moment, all the small compromises and accommodations that had somehow added up to a marriage one person could walk away from so completely. The doorbell rang while I was still wiping my eyes. I looked out the front window to see Marjorie Levinson from next door, holding what appeared to be a casserole dish. Marjorie was 67, a retired nurse with steel gray hair and the kind of practical demeanor that came from decades of dealing with people in crisis. She'd been our neighbor for 15 years, the kind of woman who noticed when packages sat too long on porches and always seemed to know when someone needed help without being asked. "I saw the moving truck," she said when I opened the door. "Figured you might not feel like cooking tonight." "That's very thoughtful, Marjorie. Thank you." I accepted the dish lasagna from the smell of it and found myself unexpectedly grateful for the simple human kindness of the gesture. "You want to talk about it?" she asked, studying my face with the keen attention of someone who'd spent a career reading people's pain. I hesitated. Dean and I had been private people, the kind of couple who kept their problems to themselves. But Dean had forfeited any right to my discretion when he'd started liquidating our assets and planning his escape. "He left me for a 28-year-old yoga instructor," I said simply. Marjorie's expression didn't change, but something hardened in her eyes. "Bastard," she said matter-of-factly, though I can't say I'm entirely surprised. "What do you mean? Can I come in?" This seems like a conversation for the kitchen table, not the front porch. I led her inside, grateful for the company. The house felt too big, too quiet, too full of echoes. "I've been seeing that young woman coming and going for months," Marjorie said as I made coffee. "Always when your car wasn't in the driveway." I wondered if I should say something, but she shrugged. "Marriage is complicated. People have their arrangements." She was here, in our house, a few times at least. Pretty thing, lots of blonde hair, drove a little white Honda. I assumed she was a client or something work-related, but she never looked like she was there for business, if you know what I mean. The knowledge hit me like a physical blow. Not only had Dean been planning his exit and moving our money around, he'd been bringing Naomi to our home, to the space I'd thought was sacred to our marriage. When, I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "Most recently, about 2 weeks ago. Right around your anniversary, actually." I remember thinking it was odd timing for a work meeting. 2 weeks ago, while I was planning our anniversary dinner, choosing wine, setting the table with our good china, Dean was entertaining his girlfriend in our living room. "I'm sorry, honey," Marjorie said gently. "I should have said something. No, you were right to stay out of it. This isn't your fault." "Maybe not, but I feel bad about it anyway." She studied me over her coffee mug. "How are you holding up?" "Really?" I considered the question. How was I holding up? The numbness was gone, replaced by something I was still trying to identify. Not just anger, though that was certainly part of it. Not just hurt, though the betrayal cut deep. Something more focused, more purposeful. "I'm not sure yet," I said honestly. "Ask me in a few weeks when the shock wears off. You know what I think?" Marjorie leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "I think Dean Sinclair just made the biggest mistake of his life, and I think he's going to figure that out sooner than he expects." "What makes you say that?" "Because men like your husband, successful, good-looking, used to being admired, they think the world revolves around them. They think they can just step into a new life and everything will be waiting for them, exactly as they imagined it. But real life doesn't work that way." He seems pretty confident in his choices, for now. "But that young woman, she's going to figure out pretty quick that she's dating a man who abandoned his wife of 35 years for someone half his age. She's going to start wondering what that says about his character. And she's going to start thinking about what happens when she's not 28 anymore." I hadn't considered that perspective. In my hurt and anger, I'd been thinking of Naomi as the villain, the homewrecker who'd stolen my husband. But Marjorie was right. Naomi was also a woman who'd gotten involved with a married man, and that foundation was going to prove unstable sooner or later. "You think she'll leave him?" "I think she'll start asking uncomfortable questions. And I think Dean is going to discover that starting over at 59 isn't as easy as he imagined, especially when everyone who matters in his life knows exactly why his marriage ended." We talked for another hour, and by the time Marjorie left, I felt more centered than I had since Dean's confession. Not better exactly, but more focused, more aware of my own strength and resources. That evening, I called each of my children, Caroline first, since she'd been my closest ally through the discovery process. How did it go today, Mom? He took what he wanted and left. It was anticlimactic, actually. Good. The less drama, the better for our legal position. How are you feeling? Angry, hurt, but also something else. Determined, maybe? I can't quite name it yet. That's normal. You've been in shock, and now you're starting to process. It's going to be a roller coaster for a while. Eli was harder to reach. The 3-hour time difference meant catching him after his kids were in bed. When I finally got him on the phone, his voice was strained. Mom, I still can't believe this is happening. Dad always seemed so stable. He was stable, honey. For 35 years, he was exactly the man I thought I married. But apparently he was tired of being that person. And this Naomi woman, she's really that young? 28. Jesus. Mom, I'm 31. She's younger than I am. I know, sweetheart. It's humiliating. What am I supposed to tell people when they ask about Dad? You tell them the truth, or you tell them it's private, or you tell them nothing at all. Whatever feels right to you. I just don't understand how he could do this to you. To us. I don't understand it either, Eli. But understanding it isn't my job anymore. Taking care of myself is. Sophie was the hardest call. My youngest, at 29, had always been the most emotional, the one who felt everything deeply. She'd been devastated by the news of the divorce, convinced that if we could just all sit down and talk, the family could be fixed. Mom, did he really take half the furniture? He took what he wanted. The house is still perfectly comfortable, but it must look so empty. It looks different. Not necessarily worse, just different. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I keep thinking if I could just talk to Dad, explain how much he's hurting everyone. Sophie, honey, your father knows exactly how much he's hurting everyone. He's made a calculation that his own happiness is worth more than our pain. You can't logic someone out of that position. But maybe if he understood, he understands perfectly. That's what makes this so hard to accept. This wasn't a mistake or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a carefully planned campaign to get what he wanted regardless of the cost to everyone else. There was silence on the other end of the line, and I could picture Sophie in her cluttered Seattle apartment, surrounded by half-finished paintings and canvases, trying to make sense of a world where fathers could simply decide they were done being fathers and husbands. I love you, Mom, she said finally. I love you too, baby, more than you know. After the calls, I sat in the living room with the lamp Dean had always said was too dim, reading a book from the shelf he'd always claimed took up too much space. The house was quiet, but it was my quiet now. For the first time in 35 years, every decision about what to watch, what to eat, how to spend the evening was entirely mine. It should have felt liberating. Instead, it felt like learning to breathe in an atmosphere with a different mix of gases possible, but requiring conscious effort. But as I turned the pages of my book, I found myself thinking about what Marjorie had said about Dean discovering that starting over wasn't as easy as he'd imagined, about Naomi eventually asking uncomfortable questions, about the reality that would inevitably intrude on whatever fantasy they'd constructed together. I thought about the cabin in Colorado, bought with money that belonged to both of us, where Dean was probably planning to play house with a woman who had no idea what kind of man she'd really gotten involved with. I thought about the retirement accounts he'd liquidated, the dreams we'd shared that he'd cashed in to fund his midlife reinvention. Most of all, I thought about the fact that Dean had counted on my shock, my heartbreak, my conditioned response, to smooth things over and make his transition as comfortable as possible. But shock was temporary, heartbreak healed. And I was discovering that I had resources Dean had never bothered to notice in all our years together, including a daughter who was an excellent lawyer, neighbors who saw more than they let on, and a will to protect myself that had been dormant for 35 years but was now very much awake. Dean wanted freedom? He was going to get more freedom than he'd bargained for, starting with the freedom to discover exactly what he'd thrown away, and exactly how alone a person could be when everyone who'd once cared about them realized they'd been expendable all along. I turned another page in my book and smiled for the first time since this whole nightmare began. Not a happy smile. I wasn't ready for happiness yet, but a smile of anticipation, of possibilities, of a future that was suddenly, entirely, mine to shape. The morning light filtered through the curtains with a gentleness that seemed almost apologetic, as if it understood the weight of the previous night's revelations. Sarah stirred first, her body instinctively seeking the warmth that had become so familiar beside her. But as consciousness crept in, so did the memory of everything that had transpired: the photographs, the confrontation, and most surprisingly, the unexpected turn their evening had taken. Marcus was already awake, his dark eyes studying the ceiling, with an intensity that suggested his mind had been racing for hours. When he felt Sarah shift beside him, he turned, and for a moment, they simply looked at each other in the soft morning light. There was something different in his gaze now, not the guarded calculation she had grown accustomed to, but something more vulnerable, more real. "Good morning," she whispered, her voice still husky with sleep. "Good morning," he replied, his hand finding hers beneath the covers. His fingers intertwined with hers, and she was struck by how natural the gesture felt despite everything that had changed between them. They lay in comfortable silence for several minutes, both lost in their own thoughts. Sarah found herself studying his profile: the strong line of his jaw, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead, the small scar near his left temple that she had never noticed before. How many other details about this man had she overlooked? In her determination to maintain professional distance, "We need to talk," Marcus said finally, his voice breaking the peaceful quiet. Sarah's stomach tightened. Those four words had never led anywhere good in her experience. "About last night? About everything." He turned to face her fully, propping himself up on his elbow. "About why you really took this case, about what happens now, about," he paused, seeming to struggle with the words, "about what this means." She had been dreading this conversation, knowing it was inevitable, but hoping to postpone it a little longer. In the harsh light of morning, the passion and connection of the previous night felt almost surreal. Had she really abandoned every professional principle she held dear? Had she really allowed herself to become this emotionally entangled with a client? "Marcus, let me go first," he interrupted gently. "Please, I've been lying here for hours trying to figure out how to say this." She nodded, pulling the sheet up to cover herself more modestly, suddenly feeling exposed in ways that had nothing to do with her physical state. Marcus sat up, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "When my wife died, I thought that was it for me. Not just the grief I expected that, but the ability to feel anything real for another person. I convinced myself that what we had was so unique, so perfect, that nothing else could ever compare." Sarah watched him carefully, noting the way his voice caught slightly when he mentioned his late wife. Even now, even after everything, that loss still affected him deeply. "For 2 years, I went through the motions," he continued. "Work, social obligations, the occasional meaningless encounter that left me feeling more empty than before. I told myself I was fine, that I was honoring her memory by not moving on. But really, I think I was just afraid." Afraid of what? Of feeling that vulnerable again. Of caring about someone enough that losing them would destroy me. He looked at her directly then, his eyes intense. "And then you walked into my office with your serious expressions and your professional boundaries, and something shifted." Sarah's heart began to beat faster. This was not the conversation she had expected. "At first, I told myself it was just attraction. You're a beautiful woman, and I'm not dead," despite how I'd been acting. "But it was more than that. The way you listened, really listened, when I talked about Elena. The way you didn't try to fix me or tell me how I should be feeling. The way you saw through all my carefully constructed walls without making me feel exposed." He reached for her hand again, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Last night, when you kissed me, it wasn't just passion. It was the first time in 2 years that I felt truly alive. And that terrifies me." Sarah felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She had expected regret, awkwardness, maybe even anger at the professional line they had crossed. She hadn't expected this raw honesty. "Marcus," she said softly, "I need you to know that what happened last night, it wasn't something I planned or expected. I've never, ever become involved with a client before. Why me then? Why now?" It was a fair question, and one she had been asking herself since the moment their lips first met. "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe it was seeing those photographs and realizing how much pain you've been carrying alone. Maybe it was the way you trusted me with something so personal and painful. Or maybe," she paused, searching for the right words. Maybe it was the way you looked at me, like I was the first person in a long time to really see you. Marcus squeezed her hand. What happens now, Sarah? Where do we go from here? It was the question that had been haunting her since she woke up. The practical part of her mind, the part that had built her successful career, was screaming that she needed to refer him to another investigator immediately, that she needed to maintain her professional integrity and reputation, that getting emotionally involved with clients was a slippery slope that could destroy everything she had worked for. But another part of her, a part that had been dormant for far too long, was whispering something different. It was reminding her that she was more than just her job, that she deserved happiness and connection just like anyone else. It was pointing out that Marcus wasn't just any client, he was a man who had touched something deep inside her that she hadn't even realized was there. We need to be smart about this, Sarah said, buttoning her blouse with hands that trembled slightly despite her determined tone. If we're right about Elena's death, then we're dealing with people who have resources, connections, and absolutely no qualms about eliminating threats. Marcus nodded grimly as he pulled on his shirt. Elena kept everything on her laptop, all her work files, her personal documents, everything. After she died, I couldn't bring myself to go through it. It's been sitting in our bedroom closet for 2 years. Our bedroom? Sarah paused, realizing the slip in his language. He caught himself, a flush creeping up his neck. My bedroom. Sorry. It's old habits. The moment of vulnerability made Sarah's heart ache for him. 2 years later, and he was still unconsciously referring to spaces as shared with his deceased wife. It was a reminder of how deep his grief ran, and how significant it was that he was willing to open himself up to caring for someone again. It's okay, she said softly. I understand. But Marcus, that laptop could be exactly what we need. If Elena found evidence of financial crimes significant enough to kill for, there might still be traces of it on her computer. I know, I should have looked years ago, but, he trailed off, running a hand through his hair. I wasn't ready. Every time I thought about going through her things, it felt like I was violating her privacy, even though she was gone. Sarah moved closer to him, placing a gentle hand on his arm. You weren't ready then, but you are now. We both are, and we're going to do this together. The weight of that promise hung between them, not just the investigation, but the deeper implication that they were truly partners in this now, in every sense of the word. 30 minutes later, they were back at Marcus's house, standing outside. The bedroom that had once been a shared sanctuary and had become a monument to loss. Sarah could see the tension in Marcus's shoulders as he hesitated at the doorway, his hand frozen on the doorknob. I can do this alone if you need me to, she offered quietly. He shook his head firmly. No, we do this together, remember? The bedroom was exactly what Sarah had expected, tasteful, expensive, and perfectly preserved as it had been when Elena was alive. The bed was made with crisp white linens, feminine touches evident in the decorative pillows and the crystal perfume bottles on the dresser. It was like walking into a museum exhibit titled Life Interrupted. Marcus moved to the walk-in closet, and Sarah followed, noting how half of the space was still filled with women's clothing. Elena's presence was everywhere: designer dresses still hanging in garment bags, shoes neatly arranged on custom shelving, jewelry boxes sitting exactly as they had been left. Here, Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion, as he reached up to a high shelf and pulled down a silver laptop case. I haven't touched it since the funeral. They carried the laptop to Marcus's home office, a masculine space that felt more lived in than the preserved bedroom. Sarah watched as Marcus powered on the computer, his jaw clenched with determination despite the obvious emotional toll this was taking on him. The laptop hummed to life, and they were immediately prompted for a password. Marcus stared at the screen for a long moment before typing slowly, forever and always. Sarah felt a pang of something, not quite jealousy, but a complex mixture of sadness and understanding. Elena had been deeply loved, and that love hadn't died with her. Sarah was going to have to make peace with that if this relationship with Marcus was going to have any chance of surviving. The desktop loaded, revealing a background photo of Marcus and Elena on what appeared to be their wedding day. Elena had been beautiful, petite and blonde, with bright blue eyes and a radiant smile. Sarah could see why Marcus had fallen so completely under her spell. Where should we start? Marcus asked, his voice carefully controlled. Sarah forced herself to focus on the task at hand, pushing aside her complicated feelings about the beautiful woman smiling at them from the computer screen. Let's look at her work files first. You said she worked for a financial consulting firm, Hamilton and Associates. She was a senior analyst, specialized in corporate audits and tax compliance for major clients. Sarah navigated to the Documents folder, which was meticulously organized into subfolders by client and date. Elena had clearly been a woman who appreciated order and structure. As they began opening files, Sarah was impressed by the thoroughness of Elena's work, detailed spreadsheets, comprehensive reports, and careful documentation of every discrepancy or irregularity she encountered. "Look at this," Marcus said, pointing to a folder labeled Personal Confidential. Inside were dozens of documents that appeared to be copies of client files, but with Elena's personal notes and observations added in red text. As they began reviewing the files, a disturbing pattern emerged. Elena had identified what appeared to be a sophisticated money laundering operation involving several of Hamilton and Associates' biggest clients. Shell companies were being used to move millions of dollars offshore, legitimate businesses were being used as fronts for illegal activities, and tax liabilities were being artificially reduced through fraudulent reporting. "Jesus," Sarah whispered, as she scrolled through page after page of evidence. Elena didn't just stumble onto something small. She uncovered a massive criminal enterprise, but it was the names involved that made Sarah's blood run cold. The operation wasn't just involving random criminals, it included prominent business leaders, politicians, and even members of law enforcement. People with the power and connections to make problems disappear permanently. "Marcus, look at this." Sarah pointed to a document that appeared to be Elena's summary of her findings. At the bottom, in red text, Elena had written, "Meeting with FBI agent Jennifer Morrison on March 15th to turn over evidence. Cannot trust local authorities. Corruption goes too deep." Marcus stared at the screen, his face pale. March 15th was the day she died. The implications hit them both simultaneously. Elena had been scheduled to meet with the FBI to turn over evidence of a massive criminal conspiracy. Instead, she had died in what appeared to be a random accident that same morning. "This wasn't a coincidence," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. Someone knew about her meeting with Agent Morrison. But how? She was being so careful, keeping everything confidential. Sarah's mind was racing. Maybe she wasn't as careful as she thought. Or maybe someone at the FBI tipped off the wrong people. Or maybe, she paused, a chilling thought occurring to her. Maybe someone at Hamilton and Associates discovered what she was doing. They continued searching through Elena's files, and their worst fears were confirmed when they found a series of increasingly urgent personal notes Elena had made in the days leading up to her death. March 10th, noticed James Hamilton asking questions about my recent work, concerned he may suspect something. March 12th, someone has been in my office. Files have been moved. Need to accelerate timeline. March 13th, certain now that I'm being watched. Moving meeting with Agent Morrison up to March 15th. Copying all evidence to external drive as backup. Sarah felt sick as the picture became clear. Elena had known she was in danger, had tried to move quickly to get the evidence to the authorities, but she hadn't moved quickly enough. "Where's the external drive?" Sarah asked urgently. Elena mentioned copying everything to a backup drive. Marcus was already searching through Elena's desk drawers. "I don't know. I never found anything like that when I was dealing with her personal effects." They searched frantically through the office, the bedroom, even Elena's car, which Marcus had kept in the garage. But there was no sign of any external storage device. "Whoever killed her must have taken it," Marcus said grimly. "They got the laptop, but they couldn't risk leaving any copies of the evidence behind." Sarah was about to agree when something occurred to her. "Marcus, you said Elena was careful and methodical, right? The kind of person who planned for every contingency." "Absolutely. She was almost obsessive about having backup plans." "Then maybe she was smarter than we're giving her credit for. Maybe she hid the drive somewhere that even you wouldn't think to look." They began a more systematic search, trying to think like Elena would have thought. Where would a careful, methodical person hide something that was literally a matter of life and death? It was Marcus who finally found it, tucked inside an old jewelry box that had belonged to Elena's grandmother. The small USB drive was wrapped in tissue paper and hidden beneath the box's felt lining. She always said this jewelry box was the one thing she would grab if the house was on fire, Marcus said softly. I should have thought of it sooner. Sarah plugged the drive into the laptop, and they both held their breath as the files loaded. Everything was there, all of Elena's research, all the evidence of the criminal conspiracy, and most importantly, a comprehensive list of everyone involved. As Sarah scrolled through the names, she felt a chill of recognition. Several of the people Elena had identified were still in positions of power: business leaders who regularly appeared in the news, politicians who had been elected to higher offices since Elena's death, and law enforcement officials who had been promoted rather than investigated. My God, Sarah whispered. These people have spent the last 2 years consolidating their power instead of facing justice. And now they think you might start asking questions about Elena's death. Marcus was staring at the screen with a mixture of anger and determination. They killed my wife, and then they've been living their lives, getting richer and more powerful, while I've been drowning in grief. Sarah could see the transformation happening in Marcus's eyes. The man who had been paralyzed by loss and guilt was being replaced by someone with purpose, someone with a mission. It was both inspiring and frightening. What's our next move? He asked, turning to her with an intensity she had never seen before. Sarah considered their options. They had evidence of a massive criminal conspiracy and what appeared to be proof that Elena had been murdered to keep her quiet. But they also knew that the people involved had resources and connections that went to the highest levels of business and government. We need to be very careful about who we trust, she said finally. Elena was going to the FBI, and she still ended up dead. We can't assume that law enforcement is clean, so what do you suggest? Sarah thought for a moment, weighing the risks and possibilities. We need to make the information public in a way that can't be suppressed or covered up. But we also need to protect ourselves while we're doing it. How? We make copies of everything and distribute them to multiple sources. Simultaneously, journalists, attorneys, law enforcement agencies, even international media outlets. We create so many copies in so many places that it becomes impossible for anyone to suppress all of them. Marcus nodded slowly. And then we disappear until the dust settles. Exactly. But Marcus, you need to understand what we're really talking about here. Once we do this, there's no going back. These people have already killed once to protect their secrets. They won't hesitate to kill again. The weight of that reality settled over them both. They were about to declare war on some very powerful and dangerous people. The smart thing would be to walk away, to let sleeping dogs lie, to choose safety over justice. But as Sarah looked at Marcus, saw the determination burning in his eyes, she knew that walking away wasn't really an option. Elena deserved justice, and they deserved the truth. More than that, they deserved the chance to build something real together, free from the shadows of the past. When do we start? Marcus asked, reaching for her hand. Sarah squeezed his fingers, drawing strength from the connection between them. We start now. They spent the next several hours meticulously copying Elena's files and preparing packages for distribution. Sarah used her network of contacts to identify trustworthy journalists and attorneys, while Marcus worked on organizing the evidence in a way that would be clear and compelling to outsiders. As the day wore on, Sarah found herself increasingly impressed by Marcus's methodical approach to the task. The man who had seemed so lost and directionless just days ago was revealing himself to be sharp, focused, and determined. She was beginning to understand what Elena had seen in him, and more importantly, she was beginning to see glimpses of the man he could become once the weight of his grief and guilt was finally lifted. By late afternoon, they had prepared packages for a dozen different recipients across the country. Sarah had arranged for the materials to be delivered simultaneously the following morning, ensuring that no single recipient could suppress the information before others had a chance to act on it. There's one more thing we need to do, Sarah said as they finished addressing the final envelope. What's that? We need to disappear. Tonight, once those packages are delivered tomorrow, we're going to become targets. We need to be somewhere safe, somewhere they can't find us while the investigation unfolds. Marcus nodded grimly. I have a cabin up north, about 3 hours from here. It's remote, off the grid, registered under a trust that would be difficult to trace back to me. Perfect. We leave tonight. As they packed their essential belongings, Sarah couldn't help but reflect on how dramatically her life had changed in just a few short days. She had gone from a successful private investigator with a carefully controlled existence to a woman in love with a client, pursuing dangerous criminals, and preparing to go into hiding. The old Sarah would have been horrified by the chaos and unpredictability of it all, but the woman she was becoming found herself exhilarated by the challenge and the possibilities that lay ahead. For the first time in years, she felt truly alive. As they loaded their bags into Marcus's car under the cover of darkness, he turned to her with an expression that was equal parts gratitude and something deeper. Sarah, I want you to know that, whatever happens next, meeting you has changed my life. You've given me back my purpose, my hope. I can't imagine doing this without you. She reached up and touched his face gently. You won't have to. We're partners now, in every sense of the word. As they drove into the night, heading toward an uncertain but shared future, Sarah knew that they were crossing a threshold from which there would be no return. They were about to expose a conspiracy that had been years in the making, and in doing so, they were risking everything they had built separately to create something new together. The road ahead would be dangerous, but for the first time in her adult life, Sarah wasn't facing it alone. And that made all the difference. The cabin sat nestled among towering pines, its weathered cedar siding blending seamlessly with the surrounding forest. As Marcus guided the car down the winding dirt road, Sarah felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. They had driven through the night in relative silence, both lost in their own thoughts about what they had set in motion and what the morning would bring. It's beautiful, Sarah said softly as they pulled up to the rustic structure. Even in the pre-dawn darkness, she could sense the peace and isolation of the place. Elena and I used to come here when we needed to get away from the city, Marcus replied, then caught himself. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. It's okay, Sarah interrupted, though she felt a familiar pang at the mention of his late wife. She's part of your history, Marcus. I understand that. As they unloaded their bags, Sarah noticed the way Marcus moved around the property with practiced familiarity. He knew exactly where the spare key was hidden, how to turn on the generator, which steps on the front porch creaked. This had been his sanctuary, his retreat with the woman he had loved with his whole heart. The interior of the cabin was cozy and rustic, with exposed wooden beams, a stone fireplace, and furniture that managed to be both comfortable and elegant. Sarah could see Elena's influence in the decorative touches, the carefully chosen artwork, the soft throw blankets, the way everything was arranged to maximize both comfort and aesthetic appeal. The bedroom is upstairs, Marcus said, setting down their bags. There's also a pull-out couch down here if you'd prefer, Marcus. Sarah turned to face him, seeing the uncertainty in his eyes. Are we going to spend the rest of our time together tiptoeing around the fact that your wife decorated this place? Because if we are, this is going to be a very long and awkward hiding. He stared at her for a moment, then let out a breath he seemed to have been holding since they arrived. You're right, I'm sorry. It's just, being here brings back so many memories. I'm sure it does. And I'm not asking you to pretend those memories don't exist or that they don't matter. Sarah moved closer to him, her voice gentle but firm. But I'm asking you to decide whether you're ready to make new memories here, with me. The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that went far beyond their current circumstances. Sarah was asking him to choose not between her and Elena's memory, but between remaining trapped in the past and embracing the possibility of a future. Marcus looked around the cabin, his gaze lingering on familiar objects and spaces. Sarah could see the internal battle playing out across his features as he wrestled with guilt, loyalty, and the undeniable pull of what was growing between them. I want to, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. God help me. I want to make new memories with you, but I don't know how to do that without feeling like I'm betraying her. Sarah's heart ached for him. She moved closer, placing her hands on his chest, feeling his heartbeat accelerate under her palms. Marcus, listen to me. Elena is gone. I'm sorry for that loss, sorrier than you can imagine, but she's gone. You're not, I'm not, and whatever we build together, it doesn't diminish what you had with her. How can you be so sure? Because love isn't finite, Sarah said, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. The heart doesn't have a limited capacity. Loving someone new doesn't mean you love someone else less. As if to prove her point, she stood on her tiptoes and kissed him, softly at first, then more insistently as he began to respond. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Sarah could see that something had shifted in his expression. Upstairs, he said, his voice rough with emotion and desire. The bedroom was dominated by a large window that looked out over the forest, and Sarah could imagine how beautiful it must be when the sun came up. But for now, all her attention was focused on the man beside her, on the way he looked at her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. Their lovemaking that night was different from their first encounter, less desperate and urgent, more tender and exploratory. They took their time discovering each other, mapping the geography of desire and affection that was growing between them. When Sarah traced the scar on Marcus's temple that she had noticed that first morning, he told her about the bicycle accident. When he was 12, when he kissed the small birthmark on her shoulder, she shared the story of how she had been self-conscious about it as a teenager. They were learning each other, building intimacy through shared vulnerabilities and whispered confessions. And when they finally came together, it felt like more than just physical release. It felt like a claiming, a promise, a commitment to whatever future they might be able to build together. Afterward, as they lay tangled in sheets and moonlight, Sarah felt more content than she had in years. Marcus's arm was wrapped around her, his breathing deep and even, and for a few precious moments, she allowed herself to forget about criminal conspiracies and death threats. There was only this: the warmth of his body against hers, the safety of his embrace, the quiet certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together. But reality had a way of intruding even into the most perfect moments. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message, jolting them both back to awareness of why they were there. "What time is it?" Marcus asked groggily. Sarah checked her phone. 8:30. "The packages should have been delivered by now." She read the text message and felt her stomach drop. "It's from David Chen, the investigative reporter at the Tribune. He says he received our package and wants to set up a secure meeting." Marcus sat up, suddenly alert. "That's good news, right? Maybe. Or maybe it's a trap. We can't trust anyone right now, remember?" They spent the next hour going through their phones, checking messages and missed calls. Several of their intended recipients had already responded, some expressing interest in the story, others asking for verification of the document's authenticity. But it was the message from FBI agent Jennifer Morrison that made Sarah's blood run cold. "She wants to meet," Sarah said, staring at the phone. "Agent Morrison, the one Elena was supposed to meet the day she died. She's asking for a face-to-face meeting to discuss the evidence we sent." Marcus frowned. "That seems like a good thing. She's the one Elena trusted, or she's the one who betrayed Elena." Sarah set down her phone and began pacing the small bedroom. "Think about it, Marcus. Elena arranges a meeting with Agent Morrison to turn over evidence of a criminal conspiracy. Elena dies that same day. Now, 2 years later, we send the same evidence to the same agent, and she immediately wants to meet with us in person." The implications were chilling. If Agent Morrison was corrupt, then she had likely passed information about Elena's planned meeting to the very people Elena was trying to expose. And now she knew exactly who had Elena's evidence and where they might be found. "So what do we do?" Marcus asked. "We can't hide forever." Sarah continued pacing, her mind racing through possibilities. "We need more information before we make any moves. I have contacts who can help us vet Agent Morrison, find out if there's any reason to suspect she's compromised." She called her former partner, Detective Ray Martinez, using a secure line she maintained for exactly these kinds of situations. Ray had retired from the force 2 years earlier and now worked as a security consultant, but he still had connections throughout law enforcement. "Sarah? Jesus? Where are you? There are some very serious people looking for you." Sarah's heart skipped. "What kind of people?" "The kind with federal badges and no sense of humor. They showed up at your office this morning asking questions about Marcus Hartwell and some investigation you've been conducting. When they couldn't find you, they started making threats about obstruction of justice and harboring fugitives. Ray, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Marcus and I have uncovered evidence of a massive criminal conspiracy involving money laundering, tax evasion, and murder. The people looking for us aren't trying to protect justice, they're trying to protect the criminals." There was silence on the other end of the line for a long moment. "Sarah, that's a hell of an accusation. You better have some serious proof to back it up." "We do. But Ray, I need you to check out FBI agent Jennifer Morrison for me." Quietly. "I need to know if there's any reason to believe she might be compromised." "Morrison? I know her reputation. She's supposed to be clean, one of the good ones. But I'll ask around, see what I can find out." "Where are you?" "I can't tell you that. But Ray, whatever you do, don't tell anyone we talked. These people have already killed once to protect their secrets. After she hung up, Sarah found Marcus standing at the bedroom window, staring out at the forest. The morning sun was filtering through the trees, casting dappled shadows across his face. "How long do we wait?" he asked without turning around. "Until we know who we can trust." Marcus turned to face her, and she could see the weight of everything pressing down on him. "Sarah, what if we're wrong about all of this? What if Elena's death really was just an accident, and we're seeing conspiracies where none exist?" It was a fair question, and one Sarah had been asking herself since they found Elena's files. The evidence was compelling, but circumstantial. They had proof of financial crimes, but no direct evidence that Elena had been murdered because of what she discovered. "Do you really believe that?" Sarah asked. "After everything we've found, after the threatening note, after the way these people have been acting?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "No," he said finally, "I don't. Elena was the most careful driver I knew. She never took risks, never drove aggressively. The idea that she would lose control of her car on a clear day, on a road she'd driven hundreds of times, it never made sense to me." Then we keep going. We find out who we can trust. We get the evidence to the right people, and we make sure Elena gets the justice she deserved. Marcus nodded, his jaw set with determination. "And what about us? What happens when this is all over?" It was the question Sarah had been avoiding, even in her own mind. What would happen to them when the immediate danger was over, when they no longer had external threats forcing them together? Would what they had built survive in the real world? Or was it just a product of intense circumstances and shared adrenaline? "I don't know," she admitted, "but I'd like to find out." Marcus crossed the room to her, cupping her face in his hands. "So would I. Whatever happens, Sarah, I want you to know that you've given me something I thought I'd lost forever." "What's that?" "Hope, purpose, the belief that there might be something worth fighting for in this world." Before Sarah could respond, her phone rang. It was Ray calling back, and the urgency in his voice when she answered made her stomach clench with dread. "Sarah, you need to listen to me very carefully. I checked out Agent Morrison like you asked, and what I found is not good. She's been under internal investigation for the past 6 months for suspected ties to organized crime. Nothing's been proven yet, but there are serious questions about her integrity." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Elena's contact in the FBI hadn't just been compromised, she had been actively working with the criminals Elena was trying to expose. "There's more," Ray continued. "I did some digging into the death of Marcus Hartwell's wife. The accident report was filed by Officer Derek Collins, the same Derek Collins who was promoted to detective 6 months later and who now works closely with several of the business leaders you mentioned in those files. The web of corruption was even deeper than they had realized. Elena hadn't just been betrayed by one corrupt agent, she had been surrounded by corruption at every level. Ray, we need help. Real help, from people we can trust. I'm already on it. I've got a contact at the state attorney general's office, someone I've known for 15 years who's clean as a whistle. Her name is Lisa Park, and she specializes in corruption cases. I'm going to reach out to her, see if she's willing to meet." Sarah felt a surge of hope. "Can you vouch for her completely?" "With my life, Sarah. Lisa Park is one of the most ethical people I've ever met. If anyone can help you navigate this mess safely, it's her." After she hung up, Sarah relayed the conversation to Marcus, who listened with growing anger and determination. "They killed Elena, and then they covered it up," he said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "They promoted the people who helped them, and they've been living their lives while I've been grieving. Marcus, we're going to get them. All of them. But we have to be smart about it." "I know. But Sarah, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about justice anymore. This is personal. They took the woman I loved, and then they made me believe it was my fault for not protecting her. I can't let that stand." Sarah saw the dangerous glint in his eyes and felt a chill of concern. Marcus's desire for justice was understandable, but she was worried it might be evolving into something darker, a need for revenge that could put them both in even greater danger. "Marcus, promise me something. Promise me we do this the right way. We get the evidence to the right people, we let the system work, and we don't take any unnecessary risks." He looked at her for a long moment, and she could see the internal struggle playing out across his features. Finally, he nodded. "I promise. But Sarah, they have to pay, all of them. For Elena, for the threat against you, for everything they've done, they will." But we're going to do this together, and we're going to do this right. As they spent the rest of the day, planning their next moves and waiting for word from Ray's contact, Sarah found herself thinking about the strange twists that had brought them to this point. A simple surveillance case had uncovered a murder and a conspiracy that reached to the highest levels of business and government. A professional relationship had evolved into something deep and meaningful and potentially lasting. She was no longer the woman who had walked into Marcus's office just days earlier, careful, controlled, emotionally distant. That woman had been safe, but she had also been alone. The woman she was becoming was taking risks, opening her heart, fighting for justice and love in equal measure. As the sun set over the forest, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Sarah and Marcus stood together on the cabin's front porch, watching the day end. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers, new decisions that would shape not just their investigation but their future together, whatever happens. Marcus said, taking her hand, "I'm glad we're facing it together." Sarah squeezed his fingers, drawing strength from the connection between them. "So am I." In the distance, they could hear the sound of a car engine approaching on the dirt road. Sarah's heart began to race. They weren't expecting anyone, and very few people knew about this cabin's existence. Marcus moved protectively in front of her, his body tense and ready. "Go inside," he said quietly. "Lock the door and call 911 if this goes badly." But as the headlights came into view, Sarah recognized the vehicle. It was Ray Martinez's old pickup truck, and behind the wheel was a woman she didn't recognize, presumably Lisa Park, the prosecutor who might be their salvation. "I think our help just arrived," Sarah said, feeling a mixture of relief and apprehension. As they watched the truck pull up to the cabin, Sarah knew they were about to cross another threshold. The evidence they had gathered would either lead to justice or get them killed. The relationship they had built would either survive the coming storm or be destroyed by it. But standing there with Marcus's hand in hers, watching the first real allies they'd had in this fight approach through the gathering darkness, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the unshakable conviction that whatever came next, they would face it together, and they would emerge stronger for having fought the good fight side by side. Lisa Park was not what Sarah had expected. The prosecutor was younger than Sarah had imagined, perhaps in her early 30s, with sharp, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and prematurely gray hair that she wore pulled back in a severe bun. There was an intensity about her that was immediately apparent, the kind of focused energy that came from someone who had dedicated their life to fighting battles most people preferred to ignore. Ray Martinez climbed out of the driver's side of the pickup truck, looking older and more weathered than Sarah remembered, but his eyes still held the sharp awareness that had made him one of the best detectives on the force. Behind him, Lisa Park emerged with a leather briefcase clutched tightly in her hand and an expression that suggested she was already several steps ahead in whatever game they were all playing. "Sarah," Ray said, approaching the porch with his hands visible and his movements deliberately non-threatening. "This is Lisa Park from the State Attorney General's office." "Lisa, this is Sarah Chen and Marcus Hartwell." Lisa Park studied them both with the calculating gaze of someone accustomed to evaluating witnesses and suspects in equal measure. "Mr. Hartwell, Miss Chen, I understand you believe you have evidence of a criminal conspiracy involving your wife's death." Marcus stepped forward, his jaw set with determination. "Not believe. No. Elena was murdered because she was going to expose a money laundering operation that reaches into the highest levels of business and government. That's a serious accusation," Lisa said, her tone neutral but her eyes alert. "Ray has given me a preliminary overview of what you found, but I need to see the evidence for myself before I can determine how to proceed." Sarah nodded toward the cabin door. "We have everything inside. Copies of financial records, Elena's personal notes, documentation of the corruption, all of it." As they settled around the cabin's rustic dining table, Lisa Park spread out her own files alongside the evidence Sarah and Marcus had compiled. The prosecutor worked methodically, cross-referencing names and dates, making notes in precise handwriting, occasionally asking pointed questions that demonstrated her thorough understanding of financial crimes and corruption cases. "This is impressive work," Lisa said finally, looking up from the documents. Elena Hartwell was clearly a skilled analyst. "The pattern of money movement she documented here represents one of the most sophisticated laundering operations I've seen." Marcus leaned forward eagerly. "So you believe us?" You can see that Elena was killed because of what she discovered. Lisa held up a cautionary hand. I can see that she uncovered evidence of significant financial crimes. Whether that evidence led directly to her death is something we'll need to prove conclusively. The circumstantial evidence is compelling, but we need more if we're going to bring charges against the people involved. Sarah felt a stab of disappointment. After everything they had risked, everything they had discovered, it still might not be enough. What kind of additional evidence would we need? Ideally, we need someone on the inside willing to testify, a co-conspirator who's willing to flip, or someone who witnessed the planning of Elena's murder. Without that, we're looking at a very difficult case to prosecute. Ray had been quietly studying the documents while Lisa spoke. Now, he looked up with a troubled expression. There's something else we need to discuss. Sarah, the people looking for you and Marcus aren't just FBI agents. I've been making calls, and from what I can gather, there's a private security firm involved as well. Corporate mercenaries with military backgrounds. Sarah felt her stomach drop. Meaning what exactly? Meaning these people aren't planning to arrest you and charge you with obstruction. They're planning to make you disappear permanently. The weight of that revelation settled over the room like a heavy blanket. They weren't just fighting a legal battle against corruption, they were fighting for their lives against people who had already demonstrated their willingness to kill. Lisa Park closed her briefcase with a sharp click. That changes things significantly. If there are private contractors involved, then we're dealing with people who operate outside normal law enforcement channels. People who don't have to worry about warrants or due process. Marcus reached for Sarah's hand under the table, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that was becoming familiar and comforting. So what do you suggest we do? We go public, Lisa said decisively. All of it, all at once, in a way that makes it impossible for anyone to suppress the information. But we have to be strategic about it. Once this information is public, everyone involved is going to be in damage control mode. Some of them will try to destroy evidence, others will try to flee the country, and a few might try to eliminate witnesses before they can testify. Sarah squeezed Marcus's hand tighter. And we'll be the primary witnesses they'll want to eliminate. Exactly. Which is why we need to move fast and make sure you're protected while we build our case. Over the next 2 hours, they developed a plan that was both audacious and terrifying. Lisa would coordinate simultaneous releases of the evidence to major news outlets, the FBI's Internal Affairs Division, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the Department of Justice. Ray would use his law enforcement contacts to ensure that clean agents and officers were ready to move on arrest warrants the moment the story broke. And Sarah and Marcus would be placed in protective custody under the supervision of a task force that Lisa personally vouched for. There's one more thing, Lisa said as they were finalizing the details. I need both of you to understand that once we do this, your lives will never be completely normal again. These people have long memories and deep pockets. Even if we successfully prosecute the main conspirators, there will always be others who view you as threats. Sarah looked at Marcus, seeing her own thoughts reflected in his eyes. They had already crossed so many lines, already risked so much. Was this really the life they wanted to choose together, constantly looking over their shoulders, always wondering if today would be the day someone came to finish what had been started with Elena? It's not really a choice, is it? Marcus said quietly. Elena died because she tried to do the right thing. If we walk away now, if we let these people continue to operate with impunity, then her death means nothing. Sarah nodded, feeling the truth of his words settle in her chest. And if we don't stop them, they'll just find other ways to silence us eventually. At least this way, we're fighting back. Lisa Park smiled for the first time since she had arrived, and Sarah could see the steely determination that had made her reputation as a prosecutor. Good. Then we move tomorrow morning. Ray, I need you to coordinate with the task force. Sarah, Marcus, I need you to prepare detailed statements about everything you've discovered and everything you've experienced since this investigation began. As Ray and Lisa prepared to leave, Lisa turned back to them with an expression of genuine concern. I want you both to know that what you're doing takes tremendous courage. Most people would have walked away by now, chosen their own safety over justice. Elena would be proud. After their visitors had driven away into the night, Sarah and Marcus stood together on the cabin's front porch, looking up at the stars that were brilliant in the unpolluted darkness of the forest. The weight of what they were about to undertake hung heavy between them, but so did the sense of rightness, of purpose, that came from finally taking action. Are you scared? Sarah asked softly. Marcus considered the question seriously before answering. Terrified, but also relieved, I think. For 2 years, I've been carrying the weight of thinking I should have done more to protect Elena, should have taken her concerns more seriously. Tomorrow, I finally get the chance to fight for her. Sarah leaned against his shoulder, drawing comfort from his solid presence. And what about us? What happens to us after tomorrow? I don't know, Marcus admitted. But Sarah, whatever happens, I want you to know that meeting you has been the best thing to happen to me since Elena died. You've given me back my life, my purpose, my ability to hope for something better. Sarah tilted her head to look at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes even in the dim starlight. Even if that life is going to be complicated and dangerous, especially then, I'd rather have a complicated and dangerous life with you than a safe and empty one without you. The words hit Sarah with unexpected force. She had spent so many years building a careful, controlled existence, avoiding the kind of emotional entanglements that could lead to pain and disappointment. But standing there with Marcus under the vast canopy of stars, she realized that all her careful planning had only protected her from living fully. I love you, she said, the words surprising her as much as they seemed to surprise him. Marcus stared at her for a long moment, and Sarah could see the emotions playing across his face: joy, gratitude, fear, and something that looked like wonder. I love you too, he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. I didn't think I'd ever be able to say that to another person again. But you've changed everything. Their kiss was soft and sweet and filled with the promise of whatever future they might be able to build together. When they finally broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, Sarah felt a sense of completeness that she had never experienced before. Come inside, Marcus said, taking her hand. Let's make the most of tonight. They made love with a tenderness and urgency that spoke of the uncertainty ahead. Every touch, every whispered endearment, every moment of connection felt precious and potentially fleeting. They were claiming each other, marking this moment as the beginning of whatever was to come, whether that was a lifetime together or merely these few perfect hours. Afterward, as they lay entwined in the darkness, Sarah found herself memorizing the feeling of Marcus's heartbeat against her chest, the way his hand traced lazy patterns on her bare back, the sound of his breathing as it gradually slowed into sleep. Tomorrow would bring danger and uncertainty, but tonight was theirs. She must have dozed, because the next thing she was aware of was Marcus gently shaking her awake. The room was still dark, but she could sense the approaching dawn in the quality of the silence outside. Sarah, wake up, Marcus said urgently. Someone's coming. Sarah was instantly alert, adrenaline flooding her system as she heard what had awakened Marcus: the distant sound of multiple vehicles approaching on the dirt road. Too many vehicles moving too fast for this to be anything innocent. How many? She asked, already reaching for her clothes. Marcus was at the window, peering through the curtains. At least 3 cars, maybe 4. They're running without headlights. Sarah's mind raced as she pulled on her jeans and grabbed her gun from her purse. Lisa Park had promised that the task force wouldn't move until the evidence was made public, which wasn't supposed to happen until later that morning. Which meant these weren't the good guys. Back exit? She asked tersely. Through the kitchen, leads to a trail that connects to the main road about a mile north. Marcus was already dressed, his own weapon in his hand. Sarah, they found us. Somehow, they tracked us here. The sound of engines was getting closer, and Sarah could see the first flicker of headlights through the trees. In minutes, maybe seconds, they would be surrounded. Go, she said, grabbing their prepared go bag and the backup copies of Elena's evidence. I'll be right behind you. But as they moved toward the kitchen, Sarah heard the distinctive sound of vehicles surrounding the cabin. They had waited too long, or the people hunting them had moved faster than anyone had anticipated. Too late, Marcus said grimly, looking out the kitchen window. They're already in position. Sarah felt a chill of terror mixed with grim determination. After everything they had discovered, everything they had shared, it might all end here. In this remote cabin where Marcus had once found peace with his first love. Marcus, she said, turning to face him in the dim pre-dawn light. Whatever happens, I want you to know that I don't regret any of it. Not the investigation, not falling in love with you, not taking this risk. If we die here, At least we die fighting for something that matters. Marcus cupped her face in his hands, his eyes fierce with love and determination. We're not going to die here, Sarah. We're going to get out of this. We're going to expose these bastards, and we're going to build a life together. I promise you. Outside, they could hear car doors slamming and the sound of booted feet moving into position around the cabin. Whoever had found them was preparing for a siege, and Sarah and Marcus were trapped inside with nowhere to run and only their wits and weapons to protect them. But as Sarah checked her gun and Marcus moved to barricade the front door, she felt something she hadn't expected in what might be their final moments, a sense of rightness, of completion, of having finally found not just love but purpose. Whatever happened next, they would face it together, and that made all the difference. The first shot shattered the kitchen window, and the final battle for Elena's justice began. The gunshot echoed through the cabin like thunder, and Sarah instinctively dropped to the floor as glass from the kitchen window rained down around them. Marcus was already moving, his military training taking over as he assessed their tactical situation with grim efficiency. How many? Sarah called out, crawling toward the living room where they would have better cover behind the stone fireplace. Marcus peered carefully around the edge of the kitchen doorway. I count at least 6 men, probably more. Professional setup, they've got the cabin surrounded and they're using suppressed weapons. These aren't local cops or FBI agents. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as the reality of their situation sank in. They were facing trained killers, corporate mercenaries who operated without the constraints of law enforcement protocols. People who could make them disappear without a trace and sleep soundly afterward. Another shot struck the cabin, this one splintering the wooden frame near the front door. Then another, and another, in a controlled pattern that suggested the shooters were testing their defenses, looking for the best angles of attack. They're not trying to kill us immediately, Marcus observed, his voice calm despite their desperate circumstances. They want something from us first. As if summoned by his words, a voice called out from the darkness beyond the cabin walls. It was amplified by a megaphone, distorted but clearly audible. Mr. Hartwell, Miss Chen, we know you're in there. We also know you have something that belongs to our clients. We're prepared to offer you a deal. Sarah and Marcus exchanged glances. The fact that their attackers wanted to negotiate suggested they still had some leverage, some advantage that wasn't immediately apparent. What kind of deal? Marcus called back while simultaneously gesturing for Sarah to move toward the stairs leading to the cabin's second floor. You return all copies of the documents you've stolen, along with any electronic devices containing that information, and we allow you to walk away. You disappear. You never speak of what you think you've discovered, and you get to live quiet. Live somewhere far from here. Sarah almost laughed at the absurdity of the offer. These people had already killed Elena for discovering their secrets, had spent 2 years covering up their crimes, and now they expected Sarah and Marcus to simply hand over the evidence and trust that they would be allowed to live. And if we refuse, Marcus called out, then we come in and take what we want anyway. But in that scenario, you don't walk away. Sarah reached the foot of the stairs and began climbing quietly, hoping to get a better view of their attackers' positions from the second floor windows. As she moved, she could hear Marcus continuing the negotiation, buying them precious time to assess their options. From the bedroom window, Sarah could see the tactical layout more clearly. The attackers had indeed surrounded the cabin, positioning themselves behind trees and vehicles with professional precision. But their focus seemed to be on containing rather than immediately assaulting, which suggested they were still hoping to resolve this without a prolonged firefight. That gave Sarah an idea. She made her way back downstairs, moving carefully to avoid creaking floorboards that might reveal her position. Marcus was still at the kitchen doorway, his weapon ready but not yet firing. Marcus, she whispered urgently, they don't know we've already distributed copies of the evidence. They think everything is here with us. Understanding flickered in his eyes. If they knew the information was already out there, they wouldn't be trying to negotiate. They'd just kill us and disappear. Exactly. Which means Lisa and Ray haven't gone public yet. Our timeline got moved up. Sarah pulled out her phone, grateful that they still had cell service despite their remote location. She quickly composed a text message to Lisa Park. Under attack at cabin. Go public now. Everything. Don't wait. She hit send just as another volley of gunshots struck the cabin, these ones aimed higher, deliberately missing but serving as a clear escalation of the threat. Your time is running out. the megaphone voice announced. "We're prepared to be patient, but our patience has limits." Marcus looked at Sarah with an expression that was equal parts love and determination. "What's our play?" Sarah checked her weapon, ensuring she had a full magazine. "We hold them off as long as we can. Give Lisa time to get the story out. Once it's public, these people lose their primary motivation for killing us. And if Lisa can't get the story out in time," Sarah met his gaze steadily, "then we make them pay as high a price as possible for taking us down." It wasn't the most optimistic battle plan, but it was the only one they had. Marcus nodded grimly and moved to a better defensive position behind the kitchen counter. The next few minutes passed in tense silence, broken only by the occasional movement outside as their attackers adjusted their positions. Sarah found herself thinking about the strange journey that had brought them to this point, from a simple surveillance case to uncovering a murder conspiracy, from professional boundaries to falling deeply in love, from the safety of normal life to facing death together in a remote cabin. If someone had told her a week ago that she would be in a gunfight defending evidence of a criminal conspiracy alongside a client she had fallen in love with, she would have recommended they seek professional help. Now, crouched behind a stone fireplace with her weapon drawn, she couldn't imagine being anywhere else. Her phone buzzed with a response from Lisa Park. "Moving now. Federal Task Force en route to your location. ETA 20 minutes. Hold on. 20 minutes." Sarah felt a surge of hope tempered by realistic assessment of their situation. 20 minutes was an eternity when facing train killers who were growing impatient. "Marcus," she called softly, "help is coming." 20 minutes. She saw him nod, his jaw set with determination. 20 minutes they could do. They had to. The sound of breaking glass from the cabin's rear window announced that the waiting period was over. Their attackers had apparently decided that negotiation was no longer worth the time and effort. "Contact rear," Marcus announced tersely, swinging his weapon toward the back of the cabin. Sarah heard footsteps on the roof above them. Someone was trying to gain access through the second floor. The coordinated assault was beginning, and they were about to be engaged from multiple directions simultaneously. The first figure appeared at the broken rear window, a dark silhouette against the pre-dawn sky. Marcus fired twice, and the figure dropped back out of sight with a grunt of pain or surprise. But almost immediately, Sarah heard movement at both the front and side windows as other attackers pressed their advance. "They're coming from everywhere," she called out. Firing at a muzzle flash she spotted through the front window. The cabin erupted in gunfire as their attackers opened up with automatic weapons, filling the air with splinters of wood and shards of glass. Sarah and Marcus took cover, returning fire when they could, but they were badly outnumbered and outgunned. A figure crashed through the front window, rolling and coming up with a weapon trained on Marcus's position. Sarah fired instinctively, her shot taking the intruder's center mass and dropping him before he could pull the trigger. But even as that threat was eliminated, another attacker appeared at the kitchen doorway, having apparently gained access through the rear of the cabin. Marcus spun toward this new threat, but Sarah could see he wasn't going to be fast enough. Time seemed to slow as Sarah watched the attacker's weapon swing toward Marcus. Without conscious thought, she threw herself between them, feeling the impact of the bullet like a sledgehammer blow to her shoulder. The force of it spun her around and sent her crashing into the wall, but her desperate movement had given Marcus the split second he needed to return fire. "Sarah," Marcus's voice was raw with anguish as he saw her go down. "I'm okay," she managed, though the spreading warmth on her shirt suggested otherwise. "Keep fighting." The firefight continued for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Sarah did her best to provide covering fire despite her wound, while Marcus moved with deadly efficiency from position to position, making their attackers pay for every inch of ground they tried to claim. But they were fighting a losing battle. There were simply too many attackers, and Sarah and Marcus were running low on ammunition. Worse, Sarah could feel herself growing weak from blood loss, her movements becoming sluggish and imprecise. Just when it seemed their situation was hopeless, Sarah heard the most beautiful sound in the world, the distinctive whoop 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 of helicopter rotors approaching fast and low. "Federal agents, this is the FBI. You are surrounded. Drop your weapons immediately." The voice boomed from speakers mounted on the helicopter, and Sarah could see powerful searchlights sweeping across the cabin and the surrounding forest. More lights were approaching from the access road. The cavalry had arrived. The change in their attackers was immediate and dramatic. The coordinated assault dissolved into confused retreat as the mercenaries realized they were now facing federal agents rather than two isolated civilians. Gunfire erupted from the forest as some of the attackers tried to shoot their way out of the encirclement, while others simply melded away into the darkness. Sarah slumped against the wall, overwhelmed with relief and fighting to stay conscious. Marcus was beside her in an instant, pressing his hands against her wounded shoulder to staunch the bleeding. "Stay with me," he said urgently. "Help is here. You're going to be fine." Sarah managed a weak smile. "Did we win?" "Yeah," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "We won." The next few minutes were a blur of activity as federal agents secured the cabin and paramedics rushed to treat Sarah's wound. She was conscious but weak as they loaded her into the helicopter for transport to the nearest trauma center, Marcus holding her an injured hand and refusing to leave her side. As the helicopter lifted off into the dawn sky, Sarah could see the aftermath of the battle spread out below them: abandoned vehicles, evidence markers, and teams of agents processing what would undoubtedly become a crime scene of national significance. "It's over," Marcus said, squeezing her hand gently. Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of exhaustion and relief settling over her like a blanket. They had survived. They had gotten Elena's evidence to the right people. And most importantly, they had done it together. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the helicopter's engines. Marcus leaned closer, his eyes bright with unshed tears and determination. "Now we heal. We testify. We watch these bastards get everything they deserve. And then we figure out what the rest of our lives look like. Together, if you'll have me. Forever, if you'll have me." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling more content than she had ever thought possible despite her pain and exhaustion. They had faced the worst that desperate, powerful people could throw at them, and they had emerged victorious. More than that, they had found something worth fighting for: not just justice for Elena, but love for each other. As the helicopter carried them towards safety and medical care, Sarah allowed herself to dream about the future they might build. Together, it would be a life lived more openly, more bravely than either of them had managed before. A life where they didn't have to choose between safety and doing what was right, because they would face whatever came together. The sun was rising as they reached the hospital, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and pink. It was, Sarah thought drowsily, as the paramedics wheeled her toward the emergency room, the most beautiful sunrise she had ever seen. The first sunrise of the rest of their lives together. Behind them, the story was already breaking on news stations across the country. The evidence Elena had died to expose was finally seeing the light of day, and the people responsible for her death would soon face justice. It had taken 2 years, but Elena Hartwell was finally going to get the justice she deserved, and Sarah and Marcus, bloodied but not broken, had found something neither of them had been looking for when this all began: a love strong enough to survive anything, and a future bright with possibility. The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard as Elena made her way to the central tower. Each step felt heavier than the last, weighted down by the knowledge she now carried. The ancient text had revealed more than she had bargained for, and the implications were staggering. She paused at the entrance, her hand trembling slightly as she reached for the ornate door handle. Behind this door lay answers that could change everything, but also questions that might be better left unasked. The brass was cold against her palm, a stark reminder of the reality she was about to face. "Yurli," came a voice from behind her. Elena turned to see Marcus approaching, his usual confident stride replaced by something more cautious, more deliberate. His eyes held the same weight she felt in her chest. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted, stepping aside as he joined her at the door. "The text, Marcus. What we read last night changes everything we thought we knew." He nodded grimly, his jaw set in a hard line. "The Council of Shadows isn't just a legend, is it? They're real, and they're still operating." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "The question is, how many of our own people are involved?" Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. The document had outlined a conspiracy that stretched back centuries, a shadow organization that had been manipulating events from behind the scenes. Names had been mentioned, some she recognized with growing horror. "We need to be careful about who we trust," she said, pushing open the heavy door. The tower's interior was dimly lit, ancient stone walls lined with tapestries that seemed to watch their every move. "If even half of what we read is true, Then we're walking into a trap every time we report to the high command. They climbed the spiral staircase in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The weight of conspiracy pressed down on them, making every shadow suspect, every colleague a potential threat. Elena's mind raced through the names she had seen in the document, trying to reconcile the people she thought she knew with the possibility of betrayal. At the top of the tower, they found themselves in a circular chamber filled with maps and documents. But something was wrong. The papers were scattered, some torn, others missing entirely. It was clear someone had been here before them, searching for something specific. "We're too late," Marcus said, surveying the destruction. "Someone knew we were coming." Elena moved to the central table where she had last seen the most important documents. They were gone, along with several others that had contained crucial information about the resistance network. Only fragments remained, like pieces of a puzzle that would never be completed. "Not everything is gone," she said, spotting a small leather journal partially hidden beneath an overturned chair. She retrieved it carefully, recognizing the handwriting immediately. "This is Commander Aldrich's personal journal. If he was compromised." She didn't need to finish the sentence. Marcus understood the implications immediately. Aldrich had been their primary contact, the one person they had trusted above all others. If he was working for the Council of Shadows, then their entire mission had been compromised from the beginning. Ellen opened the journal with shaking hands, scanning the entries quickly. What she found made her blood run cold. Meeting times, locations, names of resistance members, all carefully documented in Aldrich's neat handwriting. But the final entry, dated just yesterday, was the most damning of all. "The subjects have discovered the ancient text," she read aloud, her voice barely steady. "Their elimination has been authorized. Phase 3 of the operation will commence at sunset." Marcus grabbed the journal from her hands, reading the entry himself as if hoping he had misheard. "Phase 3, he repeated, his face pale. "What does that mean?" Before Elena could answer, they heard footsteps on the stairs below. Heavy boots, multiple sets, climbing with purpose. They exchanged a look of pure terror, realizing they had walked directly into the trap that had been set for them. "The window," Marcus whispered urgently, but even as he said it, they could see armed figures surrounding the base of the tower. There was no escape route that hadn't been anticipated and blocked. Elena's mind raced, searching for options that didn't exist. They were trapped, with evidence of their discovery in their hands and enemies closing in from all sides. The journal felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, its contents a death sentence for everyone whose names appeared within its pages. "We have to destroy it," she said, reaching for the oil lamp that sat on a nearby shelf. "If they get this journal, every member of the resistance will be hunted down and killed." But Marcus caught her wrist before she could act. "Wait," he said, his eyes fixed on something in the journal she had missed. "Look at this entry from 3 weeks ago. Aldrich didn't write all of these." "Look at the handwriting carefully." Elena looked where he was pointing and saw that he was right. Several entries were in a different hand, subtly different but clearly attempting to mimic Aldrich's style. Someone else had been writing in his journal, documenting meetings that might never have taken place, creating evidence of a conspiracy that might not exist. "It's a frame job," she breathed, understanding flooding through her. "Someone is using Aldrich's journal to make it look like he's the traitor, but he's not. He's being set up just like we are." The footsteps were getting closer now, echoing off the stone walls with ominous purpose. They had minutes, maybe less, before they would be discovered. Elena looked around the chamber desperately, searching for anything that might help them prove the truth before it was too late. In the scattered papers on the floor, she spotted something that made her heart race. A partial document with an official seal, one she recognized as belonging to Lord Vance, the king's most trusted advisor. The fragment was small, but the visible text was damning. Phase 3 authorization confirmed. Eliminate all witnesses to the Shadow Protocol. "Marcus, look at this," she said, grabbing the fragment. "Lord Vance is involved. He's the one orchestrating this whole thing." The footsteps reached the landing just outside their door. They could hear voices now, low and urgent, discussing entry strategies. Elena and Marcus looked at each other, knowing that their next few actions would determine not just their own fate, but the fate of everyone fighting against the darkness that had infiltrated their world. Elena tucked the journal fragment inside her jacket, praying they would survive long enough to expose the truth. The door handle began to turn, and she gripped Marcus's hand tightly, drawing strength from his presence as they prepared to face whatever came through that door. The morning sun continued to shine through the tower windows, indifferent to the human drama playing out within the ancient stones. But for Elena and Marcus, this moment would define everything that came after, assuming they lived to see what came next. The door burst open with a thunderous crash, revealing 3 figures in dark leather armor. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs as she recognized the lead figure, Captain Thorne, a man she had once considered an ally. His cold eyes swept the chamber before settling on them with predatory satisfaction. Elena Blackwood and Marcus. Stern, he said, his voice carrying the weight of authority and menace. By order of the High Council, you are under arrest for treason, sedition, and conspiracy against the crown. Elena stepped forward, her chin raised defiantly despite the fear coursing through her veins. What treason, Captain? Uncovering the truth about the corruption that has infected our very government? Thorne's laugh was harsh and mirthless. The truth? You speak of truth while consorting with enemies of the state, stealing classified documents, and spreading lies about loyal servants of the crown. His hand moved to the hilt of his sword. Lord Vance has been particularly concerned about your activities. The mention of Vance's name sent a chill down Elena's spine, but it also confirmed her suspicions. The web of conspiracy was even more extensive than she had imagined. She felt the journal fragment pressing against her ribs, a small piece of evidence that could expose everything if they could just survive long enough to use it. Lord Vance, Marcus said, his voice steady despite their precarious situation. Tell me, Captain, how long have you been taking orders from him instead of following your oath to protect the innocent? Something flickered in Thorne's eyes, doubt. Perhaps were the remnant of the honorable man he had once been. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by the cold certainty of a man who had chosen his side and committed to it fully. Bind them, he ordered his men. Lord Vance wants to speak with them personally before their execution. As the soldiers moved forward with heavy rope, Elena's mind raced. Execution. The word hit her like a physical blow, but it also clarified something important. If they were to be executed, it meant Vance and his conspirators were confident enough in their position to eliminate witnesses publicly. That level of confidence suggested they were close to achieving whatever their ultimate goal might be. The ropes were rough against her wrists, tight enough to cut off circulation if she struggled too hard. Beside her, Marcus submitted to the binding with apparent resignation, but she caught the subtle tensing of his muscles, the way his eyes tracked every detail of their captor's movements. He was planning something, waiting for the right moment. Move, Thorne commanded, gesturing toward the staircase. And don't think about trying anything heroic. My men have orders to kill you at the first sign of resistance. They were marched down the spiral stairs, their footsteps echoing ominously in the confined space. Elena tried to memorize every detail of their route, every possible escape opportunity, but the tower offered few options. The walls were solid stone, the windows too narrow to climb through, and their guards were experienced professionals who knew how to handle prisoners. As they reached the courtyard, Elena saw that the morning activity had changed dramatically. Soldiers in Vance's colors were everywhere, moving with the precision of a well-coordinated operation. Regular guards were nowhere to be seen, replaced entirely by men whose loyalties clearly lay with the shadow conspiracy. The coup has already begun, Marcus murmured under his breath, barely loud enough for her to hear. Elena nodded slightly, understanding the implications. Whatever Vance's plan was, they were witnessing its implementation in real time. The question was whether anyone remained who could stop it, and whether she and Marcus would live long enough to warn those who might still be loyal to the true crown. They were loaded into a covered wagon that waited in the courtyard center. The interior was windowless and cramped, designed more for transporting cargo than human passengers. As the wagon lurched into motion, Elena felt the journal fragment shift against her ribs, reminding her of the evidence she carried. We have to find a way to get this information to someone who can act on it, she whispered to Marcus, hoping their guards couldn't hear over the clatter of wheels on cobblestone. Who? Marcus replied quietly. If Vance has been planning this, as long as we suspect, he'll have identified and neutralized most potential threats to his operation. Elena closed her eyes, thinking through everyone they had encountered in recent weeks, trying to identify someone who might still be outside Vance's influence. The task seemed hopeless until she remembered something that made her pulse quicken. With possibility, Sister Catherine, she whispered. The monastery. Vance wouldn't think to monitor the religious orders, especially not the contemplative sisters, who rarely interact with court politics. Marcus's eyes lit up with understanding. Sister Catherine was an old friend of Elena's family, a woman who had chosen the religious life but maintained connections throughout the kingdom's nobility. More importantly, she was one of the few people who had direct access to the king himself, serving as his spiritual advisor when court politics became too overwhelming. If we can get word to her somehow, Marcus said, his voice barely audible, she might be able to warn the king about what's happening. But even as they spoke, the wagon was carrying them further from any possibility of contact with the outside world. The rhythm of the wheels suggested they were traveling at considerable speed, moving toward whatever fate Vance had planned for them. The journey continued for what felt like hours, though Elena suspected it had been less time than her fear made it seem. When the wagon finally stopped, she heard voices outside, muffled by the heavy canvas covering. The tone was respectful, deferential. They were arriving at somewhere important. Light flooded the wagon's interior as the canvas was pulled back, revealing they had arrived at Ravenshallow Keep, Lord Vance's ancestral home. The fortress loomed above them, its black stone walls seeming to absorb the midday sunlight rather than reflect it. Elena had visited here once before, years ago, when Vance had still maintained the pretense of loyalty to the crown. Welcome to your final destination, Thorne said with grim satisfaction as they were pulled from the wagon. Lord Vance is waiting for you in the Great Hall. They were marched through corridors Elena remembered as being filled with light and warmth during her previous visit. Now they felt cold and oppressive, lined with guards whose faces showed no mercy or compassion. The transformation was complete. Ravenshallow had become the headquarters of a rebellion, though one that sought not to overthrow the crown but to control it from the shadows. The Great Hall's massive doors stood open before them, revealing a chamber that had been transformed into something resembling a throne room. At the far end, seated in an ornate chair that was clearly meant to evoke royal authority, sat Lord Vance himself. He was older than Elena remembered, his hair now completely gray, but his eyes held the same sharp intelligence that had made him such an effective advisor to the king. The difference was that now that intelligence was focused entirely on his own ambitions rather than the kingdom's welfare. Elena Blackwood, he said, as they were brought before him, his voice carrying across the hall with practiced authority. Marcus Stern, you have caused me considerable inconvenience. Elena met his gaze steadily, refusing to show the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. Not as much inconvenience as you've caused the kingdom with your treachery, Lord Vance. Vance's smile was cold and calculating. Treachery? My dear girl, I prefer to think of it as necessity. The kingdom requires strong leadership, decisive action. The current king is inadequate to the challenges we face, so you decided to replace him with yourself, Marcus said, his voice filled with contempt. Replace? Vance laughed, a sound devoid of genuine humor. Oh, my dear Marcus, your understanding of the situation is quite limited. I have no intention of replacing the king. I simply intend to ensure that his decisions align with what is best for the realm. The implications of his words hit Elena like a physical blow. This wasn't just a coup, it was something far more insidious. Vance intended to control the king, while leaving him on the throne, ruling the kingdom through manipulation and shadow authority. You'll never succeed, she said, though even as she spoke the words, she wondered if they were true. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.